Madison Hart never meant to disappear after that night, but when she ran, pregnant and terrified, she carried more than a secret. Across the city, ruthless tech CEO Adrian Wolf couldn't shake the haunting memory of a stranger's scent, a fragrance so rare it lingered in his mind long after she vanished. He had no name, no face, only the scent. When fate forces their worlds to collide again, a twisted truth unravels. Madison's flight wasn't a mistake, and Adrian's obsession may uncover a conspiracy darker than either of them ever imagined. It was just past midnight when the black car pulled up in front of the Harrington Grand Hotel. The rain was relentless, painting streaks across the windshield as the engine went silent. The woman inside didn't wait for the doorman to approach. She stepped out on her own, pulling her hood tighter around her face. Her black coat swallowed her frame, and her head remained low, hiding her features. She didn't speak. She simply walked to the front desk and slid a small stack of cash under the glass. The receptionist hesitated but said nothing. The hotel catered to discretion, and the woman had the look of someone who didn't want questions asked. The name she gave, Marina Vale, wasn't on any list, but the money was enough. To skip verification, she declined the porter's help, took the room key, and disappeared into the elevator. Hours later, security footage would show her stepping off on the top floor. That floor only had one suite, the penthouse. It belonged to Daniel Marlowe, CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm. The surveillance system, usually flawless, glitched just as she reached his door. For 37 minutes, the screen went black. The next morning, the suite was cleaned as usual. Staff reported nothing strange. Daniel Marlowe had already left for his morning meeting. He was his usual calm, focused self until he was handed a report. Room service had found something missing. Not valuables, but the bed sheets. A second set of footprints had been found in the hallway carpet. The penthouse door had no forced entry, and no one on record had entered or exited. Even more alarming, the camera feed for the hallway was corrupted, which hadn't happened in years. Daniel shrugged it off at first. He didn't remember inviting anyone over. He didn't drink. He didn't party. His nights were spent working or sleeping. Yet something tugged at the edges of his mind. A faint memory. A scent. Something sweet but sharp, like crushed flowers on cold glass. It made him pause in the middle of his meeting. His assistant noticed, but he waved it off. Elsewhere in the city, Elise Monroe sat in a tiny apartment, shaking. Her eyes were wide and red, her hands trembling as she packed her things. She stuffed clothes into a suitcase without folding them. She didn't check her phone. She had already removed the SIM card. Her mirror was shattered, her favorite perfume bottle empty. The scent still hung in the air, jasmine and wild honey, rare and foreign. It clung to her skin, her hair, her memories. She kept trying to replay what happened that night, but nothing came. Only flashes, a hotel hallway, a glass of wine she didn't finish, a dizzy feeling. Then, nothing. She had gone to the party only because her friend had pushed her. As an intern at Marlowe Innovations, Elise had no real business at the company's Investor Gala. But she'd gone anyway. She remembered standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching the powerful people mingle. Then a man had approached her. She couldn't recall his face, only that he had offered her a drink. She remembered refusing, but maybe she didn't. After that, her memory splintered. The next thing she knew, she had woken up in a luxurious bed with no clothes, no purse, and no idea how she got there. She left quietly. No one stopped her. She kept her head down as she walked through the early morning crowd. Back at her apartment, she sat under the shower until the water turned cold. Then she began erasing her existence. Deleted her email, burned her work badge, emptied her bank account. She knew how people would look at her if the truth came out. A low-level intern claiming something happened in a hotel room? No one would believe her, especially not if the man at the center of it was the CEO. So she made a decision. She would disappear. By the time Daniel's assistant returned to the office later that day, Elise's desk was empty. Her files had been removed. Her email bounced back. At first it was assumed she quit. Interns did that all the time. But someone eventually checked the guest list from the gala. Elise's name wasn't on it. That raised questions. Why had she been there? Who invited her? And why had she gone missing the same night as the strange hotel incident? Security was pulled. The footage should have confirmed everything. But that's when they discovered the blackout. Someone had tampered with it. The system had been hacked, but nothing else in the building was touched. Just the cameras on the top floor. Daniel ordered an internal inquiry, though he claimed not to remember anything suspicious. In truth, the scent haunted him. He had smelled it again that morning, faintly on his pillow. It made no sense, but something in his gut told him this wasn't random. Meanwhile, Elise boarded a late-night bus headed north. She used cash to pay the driver and gave a fake name when asked. She rode with her hood up and her arms around her stomach. She was nauseous, but not from nerves. Something was different inside her. She hadn't been late before. Not once. But now she couldn't deny it. Something had happened that night. Something real. As the city faded behind her, Elise thought of everything she left behind. Her job, her future, her identity. She didn't know where she was going, just that it had to be far away, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knew her name. She didn't care about the money, or the power, or revenge. She just wanted to feel safe again. But what Elise didn't know was that the story wasn't over. Not even close. Someone was already looking for her. Not because he remembered her face, not because he knew her name, but because he remembered her scent. It was embedded in his mind now, like a mark. And someday, somehow, it would lead him back to her. In the heart of a city filled with secrets, a storm had just begun. The town Elise arrived in was the kind of place people only found when they were trying not to be found. A speck on the map, tucked between forested hills and faded farmland, it didn't boast much more than a single main street, a post office, and a few scattered homes. The air was still and clean, the nights quiet enough to hear the wind moving through the trees. For Elise, it was perfect. She rented a small cottage at the edge of town, far from the road, with ivy crawling up its wooden walls and fog collecting in the mornings. The landlord, an elderly woman who asked no questions, accepted a deposit in cash and handed over the keys without pressing for ID. Elise signed the rental agreement using a false name. From that moment on, she was no longer Elise Monroe. She became Anna Cole. Her days settled into a simple rhythm. She worked at a local bakery, arriving before sunrise to help with the first batch of bread. The owner, a widowed man in his 60s, welcomed her with a nod, and taught her how to work the ovens and handle the register. Elise learned quickly, blending in with the quiet townsfolk who minded their own business. She wore her hair differently, dressed plainly, and never spoke about the life she left behind. No one suspected she was running from anything. To them, she was just another quiet girl looking for a fresh start. But while the town offered peace, Elise's mind remained restless. Each night, she locked the doors, checked the windows twice, and kept a kitchen knife near her bed. She had nightmares she couldn't explain, fragments of memory that refused to come into focus. Sometimes she dreamed of dark hallways and cold hands. Other times, she simply woke up gasping, her skin damp with sweat and the faint scent of perfume, still lingering in her nose, though she hadn't worn any since the day she left. Weeks turned into months, and her body changed. She began waking up nauseous. Her appetite shifted. And then the truth hit her with a force she couldn't deny. She was pregnant. She sat on the bathroom floor for an hour after seeing the test result, staring at the wall as if it might offer her a way out. But there was no escape from what had happened. At first, she considered leaving again, but something stopped her. The thought of raising a child in hiding, yes, was terrifying. But starting over again, being someone else in another strange town, seemed worse. So she stayed. She bought prenatal vitamins in the next town over, used a scarf to cover her face, and paid in cash. She told no one. The pregnancy progressed quietly. Elise kept to herself, choosing longer shifts at the bakery to keep busy. The owner assumed she was just trying to save money, and he didn't ask why she had started wearing looser clothes. When she finally began to show. She claimed it was from a brief relationship before she moved. People accepted it. After all, this was a town where secrets were rarely spoken aloud, but not everything stayed quiet. One morning, Elise noticed a black car parked down the street from the bakery. Its windows were tinted, the license plate unfamiliar. It was gone by the time she closed up for the day. A few days later, it returned. No one got out. It just sat there for nearly an hour before pulling away. She didn't mention it to anyone, but she didn't sleep that night. The same week, she came home to find her front door slightly ajar. Nothing was taken. No signs of forced entry, but her drawers were disturbed. One thing was missing. An empty bottle of perfume she had kept at the back of a cabinet, hidden and wrapped in cloth. The same perfume she wore the night at the hotel. It was gone. That detail made her stomach turn more than anything else. Whoever had come inside her home hadn't taken money or valuables. They had taken that one specific item. It wasn't random. Someone knew. Her sense of safety cracked. Back. In the city, Daniel Marlowe sat in his office, distracted. He had been more distant than usual, more guarded. His staff assumed it was the pressure from shareholders or another long meeting. But Daniel was haunted by something he couldn't explain. A scent had followed him, not literally, but in memory. He had encountered it once again, faintly, when passing a stranger at a gala. The woman had worn a similar perfume, and it stopped him in his tracks. He couldn't place it, couldn't name it. But it had stirred something deep and unpleasant. His vision had blurred, and his hands trembled. He excused himself early and went home in silence. That night, he pulled up archived security reports from the night of the blackout. He went over every file, every entry, every missing second. His security team had done the same months ago, but now he was looking for something else, something sensory, something that would explain why the smell of crushed jasmine and wild honey made his heart race. He ordered a private investigation. Quiet. Off the books. He wanted to know who had been in his penthouse that night, who had erased the camera feed, and why the memory of that night still felt like a locked door in his mind. The team began combing records, starting with the gala guest list. Elise Monroe's name was never there, but someone remembered her face. An intern, one said, who disappeared right after the event. That raised a flag. Her personnel file was thin, just a few pages of HR data and an old ID photo. But her fragrance, history from an old gift registry tied to a client loyalty account, matched a discontinued perfume. That detail made Daniel pause. There were only a handful of people who ever purchased that specific scent. His team acquired a sample and ran it through chemical analysis. It was a match. The perfume had been left faintly on his pillow that night. Daniel didn't know the woman's name, not yet. But he remembered the scent, and now it had a trail. Elise sat on her front porch the next evening, watching the wind move through the tall grass, her hands gently cradling her growing belly. She told herself she was safe, that no one knew where she was, but she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. Someone, somewhere, was drawing closer. And the child growing inside her carried a secret that could never be hidden forever. In a town built on silence, the truth was beginning to stir. It was a quiet morning. When the man in the suit entered the bakery, Elise didn't notice him at first. She was too busy sweeping flour from the floor, her apron dusted in white. The man didn't speak. He didn't order anything. He simply stood near the counter, looking around slowly, as though he were taking in more than just the smell of baked bread. Elise glanced up briefly, her heartbeat quickening for no clear reason. He was well-dressed, but not in a flashy way. Crisp black suit, no tie, pale eyes that didn't match his calm posture. After a moment, he turned and left without a word. That night, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She locked her doors earlier than usual and closed the curtains tightly. But the unease followed her like a shadow. The next morning, she found a single envelope on her porch. Inside was a photograph of her holding her baby at the park a week earlier. She hadn't seen anyone taking pictures. The photo wasn't threatening on its own, but the message was clear. Someone knew where she was. Someone had been watching. Back in the city, Daniel Marlowe was finally starting to put pieces together. His private investigation had turned up more than he expected. Through a combination of employee records, security archives, and financial tracing, they had found Elise Monroe, an intern who had worked briefly at his company before disappearing without a trace. Her last known address had been vacated. Her bank account had been emptied. She had not contacted any friends or co-workers since the night of the gala. But one detail stood out above all others: the rare perfume she wore. The formula had been discontinued years ago, and only a few dozen customers had purchased it in the last 3 years. Elise was one of them. When Daniel inhaled a preserved sample, his stomach turned. The scent sparked a feeling that hovered between familiarity and fear. It was like catching the edge of a dream just before waking. The deeper he dug, the more unsettling the story became. His security consultant recovered fragmented data from the hotel system and discovered traces of unauthorized access. The cameras hadn't simply malfunctioned, they had been hacked. Someone had deliberately erased footage of the penthouse level. Even worse, records showed that a hotel key card had been cloned that night, giving access to his suite. The logs were carefully altered, but not completely. A hidden string of code led to a name, Aaron Colby, a disgraced former executive from a rival firm who had publicly clashed with Daniel over a tech patent lawsuit 2 years earlier. The theory began to take shape. Someone had planned to frame Daniel for a scandal, a setup, and Elise had been caught in the middle of it. It explained the missing memories. Daniel had likely been drugged. The evidence had been wiped, and Elise, unknowingly used as part of a corporate scheme, had vanished before the plan could be completed. But if Elise had been pregnant when she left, the implications were massive. There was a child involved, Daniel's child. Daniel ordered the team to locate her discreetly. No legal threats, no intimidation. He didn't want a scandal. He wanted answers. The team tracked her movements through small clues, delivery receipts, bus ticket stubs, and a stray library card registration under a fake name. Eventually, one investigator narrowed her location down to a remote town with no surveillance cameras and little police presence. Perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. To confirm her identity, one of Daniel's men visited the bakery. He collected a used coffee cup from the trash. Elise had left it behind while clearing tables. The cup was sealed and sent to ETH, a private lab for DNA testing. Daniel waited in silence for 3 days, hardly sleeping. When the results came in, they shattered everything he thought he knew. The DNA was a 99.9% match. The baby was his, but questions still circled him like vultures. Who had orchestrated the setup? Why had Elise never come forward? Was she hiding because she feared him, or because she didn't even know what had happened that night? Meanwhile, Elise's world was shrinking. The bakery became a place of anxiety instead of comfort. She watched every car that passed. She noticed the same black sedan parked near the grocery store twice in 1 week. Her mailbox was opened when she hadn't checked it. One afternoon, she found the back window of her cottage slightly ajar. Nothing was missing. But the baby's toy, normally on the nightstand, was on the floor, turned upside down. She began to sleep less. She kept her baby close, even during naps. She started writing everything down in a notebook, dates, times, strange faces, just in case she needed to run again. But this time, it felt different. Like no matter how far she went, someone would follow. They already knew who she was. Then, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a file containing documents, her photo, a timeline of events from the night of the gala, and a printed email chain that showed her name on a list of targets related to Daniel Marlowe. Her knees gave out as she read. The plan hadn't just been about framing a CEO. It had involved her from the start. She stared at the baby sleeping peacefully in the crib. Everything she had built, this fragile new life, was based on a lie she had never even told. But now, it was crashing down around her. Daniel made his way to the town in person soon after. He didn't arrive with security, no announcement. Just a quiet car and a man burdened by too many unknowns. He walked past the bakery window and froze. The scent was unmistakable. It lingered in the air like a question he hadn't dared to ask. A scent he'd chased across half a year of confusion. He didn't approach Elise that day. He turned and left. But he had seen enough. Elise stood at the window later, holding her child, her eyes scanning the empty street. She felt something different in the air, a tension she couldn't name. The past had caught up to her. And the man who had unknowingly shared one night with her, and whose memory had been clouded by another's scheme, was finally close. She had once hoped that scent would fade, that it would disappear with time. But it had followed her like a ghost, clinging to the fabric of her life. Now, it had led the one person she wanted to forget straight to her door. The truth was no longer a secret. It was waiting to be confronted. Elise woke up before dawn, the room still heavy with shadows. Her child stirred quietly in the crib nearby, a soft cooing sound breaking the silence. She stood by the window, watching as the sky began to shift from black to a pale gray. The world outside looked unchanged, trees swaying, fog hugging the ground, but inside her chest, everything had started to unravel. The file she had received still lay open on the table. She had read it over a dozen times, trying to understand the full extent of what had been done to her. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She had been selected, chosen, a pawn in a plan that had never considered the weight of a real person's life. And the worst part was knowing that the man whose child she now cradled in her arms had likely known nothing at all. She could no longer blame him. The evidence pointed elsewhere. She considered leaving again, packing a bag and disappearing before anyone could stop her. But the thought of running no longer felt like safety. It felt like surrender. The truth had already found her once. It would only come again. The day passed in a blur. Elise barely touched her food, her nerves stretched. Thin, she felt watched, though she saw no one. The small town that had once felt like a hiding place now felt like a glass box. Every corner, every passerby seemed suspect. Even the wind tapping at the windows made her flinch. That afternoon, a letter arrived with no stamp, placed gently into her mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few words typed in black ink. "You were never meant to remember, but I always did." There was no name, no clue who had written it, but the implications were chilling. Someone from that night, someone who had been close enough to know the full extent of the plan, was still involved, still watching. And they didn't intend to let the truth stay hidden. Miles away, in a quiet hotel room on the edge of town, Daniel sat with the same file spread across a desk. His mind raced with questions. He now knew Elise hadn't left by choice. Her disappearance had been an escape from chaos, not guilt. The plan to destroy him had never succeeded, but it had broken lives. And the worst part was knowing that someone had used both of them to get close enough to do it. He reviewed every step of the investigation, looking for what had been missed. One name kept surfacing, Aaron Colby. The man had gone underground after being exposed for a corporate fraud. Everyone believed he had fled the country, but recent surveillance suggested otherwise. A string of anonymous wire transfers had come from a rural bank near Elise's current home. Too close to be coincidence. Daniel began to suspect that the reason Elise was still being watched had little to do with him, and everything to do with what she might know. If she remembered any details from that night, even fragments, it could expose Colby's entire operation. She was a liability, a target, and the child, his child, only raised the stakes. That night, Daniel left the hotel and drove toward Elise's cottage. He didn't call ahead, didn't try to arrange a meeting. He simply stood across the street, staring at the soft yellow light coming from her window. He saw the silhouette of her pacing, holding the baby, occasionally stopping to check the door. He stayed there for almost an hour before driving away. Inside, Elise had felt it. The presence. She hadn't seen anyone. But a chill had crept into the room, and she found herself double-checking the locks again. Her paranoia wasn't just nerves anymore. It was a kind of survival instinct that had kept her safe for months, and tonight it screamed louder than ever. The next morning, she made a decision. She packed a bag not to flee but to prepare. If something was coming, if her past was finally stepping fully into the present, she wanted to face it ready. She wrote a letter and tucked it into the drawer of her nightstand. It explained everything, just in case she didn't return. Before leaving, she walked through the small cottage, checking every window and corner. Something was wrong. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. In the kitchen, the cupboard door was slightly ajar. She was sure she hadn't left it that way. Her stomach twisted. That night, Daniel received a message on his private line. A blurry photo of Elise standing in her yard, holding her baby, with a crosshair symbol lightly watermarked across the image. It came with a short message: "Turn back, or she disappears forever." Daniel didn't hesitate. He forwarded the message to his team and jumped in his car. The time for quiet investigation was over. Someone was threatening the lives of the woman and child he now knew were part of him, and he wouldn't let it happen. At the same time, Elise returned from a walk in the woods behind her cottage and found her front door wide open. The crib was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. Panic surged through her chest. She called out, running through the house, searching every room. Then, in the center of the bed, she found a note. It was typed in the same font as before. "Now you understand what happens to those who dig too deep." The next hour felt like a blur. She called the sheriff, but there was no answer. The town's only patrol car was already out on another call. Elise knew she didn't have time to wait. She grabbed her bag, the letter from her nightstand, and ran outside, her heart pounding so hard she could barely think. As she reached her car, a second vehicle pulled into the driveway. She froze, ready to run, until the door opened and Daniel stepped out. He looked different than she remembered. Older, heavier with grief, but alert. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, neither of them spoke. The recognition was immediate. The air between them was thick with things unsaid. Then Elise broke the silence. "They took him." Daniel's jaw clenched. He nodded once. "We're getting him back." In that instant, there was no past, no confusion, just two people linked by tragedy and blood, ready to do whatever it took to reclaim what had been stolen from them. And somewhere in the darkness, the man who had orchestrated it all watched from a distance, knowing his carefully spun web was beginning to fray. The storm rolled in as night fell, wind slashing through the trees and rain battering the windshield of Daniel's car as it tore down the narrow country road. Elise sat in the passenger seat, gripping the letter she had found on the bed. Her baby, her son, had been taken, and the man beside her, once a stranger, was now her only hope. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. The tension between them was no longer from confusion or mistrust. It was urgency, pure and unfiltered. Daniel's team had already traced the origin of the threatening photo. A signal pinged from a remote storage facility at the edge of the next county. It had been purchased under a false name connected to one of Aaron Colby's shell companies. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the only lead they had, and time was running out. As they approached the facility, headlights cut through the rain, revealing a long chain-link fence and a steel gate. It was locked, but Daniel rammed it with the car without hesitation. The metal screeched and gave way. Inside, rows of storage units stood in silence, shadows flickering under the swaying lights. Everything about the place felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. Daniel parked and got out, drawing a flashlight from the glove box. Elise followed, her eyes sharp, scanning every corner. The storm muffled sound, but she could feel something out there. Someone watching. She wasn't wrong. They searched unit after unit, breaking locks when needed. Finally, in one of the farthest rows, Daniel spotted a faint light glowing beneath a unit door. He signaled Elise to stay back and approached slowly, heart pounding. He gripped the lock and yanked hard. It snapped free, and the door rattled upward with a deafening screech. Inside was a single chair, a table, and a baby carrier in the center. Daniel rushed forward, Elise right behind him. Her breath caught as she saw her baby safe and sleeping, wrapped in the same blanket she had used that morning. Relief flooded her body, and tears sprang to her eyes. She dropped to her knees, scooping him into her arms, whispering his name over and over. But something was off. There was no one else, no guards, no traps, just a device blinking red on the table. Daniel stepped closer. It was a recording device. He hit play. Aaron Colby's voice filled the unit, calm and cold. "You found her. Impressive. I always knew you'd come looking eventually. I gave her a chance to disappear. She didn't take it. That's on her. You've got the child. Congratulations." But this story doesn't end with a reunion. It ends with a reckoning. You took my company. You took everything. Now I take you. The message ended with a beep. Daniel stared at the device, his jaw set. Elise rocked her son, her fingers trembling. They knew what this meant. This wasn't the final act. It was a warning. Suddenly the roar of engines shattered the quiet. 2 black SUVs skidded into the lot, doors flinging open. Men poured out, dressed in dark clothing, some masked. Daniel yanked Elise behind him and drew a small weapon from under his jacket. He fired a warning shot into the air, and the men halted, surprised. In the distance, another vehicle approached, fast. Daniel's backup had arrived. His private security detail leapt out, returning fire. Chaos erupted. Elise ducked behind the storage unit, cradling her son, shielding him from the noise and flashes. She had never imagined her life would spiral into this. Bullets, betrayal, and a battle in the rain. Daniel moved like a man with nothing to lose, precise and calm. He fought not just to survive, but to protect. Shots rang out, screams echoed, and tires screeched. One by one, the attackers were taken down or fled into the darkness. Within minutes it was over. Silence fell again, broken only by the cry of Elise's baby. The aftermath was surreal. Elise stood, soaked and shaking, as Daniel walked toward her. He looked worn and bloodied, but his eyes were steady. "It's done," he said simply. But they both knew it wasn't over. Authorities arrived an hour later. Elise and Daniel gave their statements, leaving out the parts no one would understand. No one arrested that night had Aaron Colby's face. He hadn't been there. He was still out there, watching, planning, waiting. In the weeks that followed, Elise and Daniel stayed in a secure location. Slowly, their story came to light. Daniel used his influence to reopen investigations into Colby's network, exposing corruption, bribery, and manipulation that had remained hidden for years. Elise was no longer a shadow in the system. She was the key witness in a case that shocked the business world. She was offered protection, a new identity, even money. But she didn't want to run anymore. Daniel saw something shift in her during that time. She was no longer the frightened woman trying to hide in a bakery. She was a mother ready to defend her child, a survivor who had faced the worst and chosen to fight back. And despite everything, the lies, the loss, the fear, he found himself standing beside her not out of guilt or responsibility, but out of something deeper. Eventually, the world calmed. Colby's empire crumbled. Arrests were made. Warrants were issued. But Colby himself vanished without a trace, slipping away once more. No one knew where he had gone. Some said he died in the chaos. Others believed he was simply biding his time. Elise and Daniel moved quietly into a new life. Not one of luxury or headlines, but of quiet mornings and slow healing. They didn't label what they were. They didn't rush. They simply existed, together, bound, by a past that had almost destroyed them and a child that had brought them back. The scent that had started it all, the rare perfume, faded from Elise's skin in time, washed away by countless nights of fear, survival, and eventually, peace. But for Daniel it lingered in his memory, not as a trigger or a mystery, but as a reminder of fate, of consequence. Of the night, everything changed. The girl who had run away was no longer running, and the man who had once forgotten everything had finally remembered what mattered most. In the end, the story didn't close with vengeance or loss. It closed with something far more powerful: the choice to begin again.